Najpierw przyjmijmy porządek posiedzenia i zatwierdźmy decyzję koordynatorów.
There is also a point on delegated and implementing acts. You got them before your eyes. Let's not dwell much on it. And actually we're having a vote, an opening of a remote voting procedure in parallel with the committee proceedings. I'm sure you're familiar by now how it is like. We have done it a number of times, so I won't read out the script again. Just trust and confide on your ability to follow the rules that have been set forth so that we may continue our works despite these conditions by remote electronic proceedings. It's to be voted the situation of fundamental rights in the European Union annual report for the years 2018-2019 report from our colleague Claire Daly. Okay. And now. Yeah, the agenda is deemed to be adopted. That's for sure. Points 4 and 13 are being postponed for the next meeting, and point 6, due to the withdrawal of the request for the vote of ECR Group's request to challenge coordinators' decision procedure, launched a debate regarding recent terrorist attacks in France and Austria. Ways to combat terrorism has been cancelled. Okay. I will escape the delegated acts and implementing decisions to go right to the, as I said, the remote voting procedure, the amendments of the report by Claire Daly. And point number 5, artificial intelligence, interpretation and application of international law insofar as the EU is affected, areas of civil and military uses, state of authority outside the scope of criminal justice. Now we better go as to the vote. There is something we must do, which is verify the quorum so that the vote can actually take place. If you please confirm that you are alive, that'll help. Are you there? Is it confirmed? No, not yet. I mean, no one in the room, so there are no hands to be raised, just pressing button so that you may send a live signal for us who cannot see you. But we know you are there. Despite we do not see you, we know that you are alive. Please, let us know that we have the quorum. One more, please. One more button. One more button. Now we have made it. We have reached the quorum. I thank you for that. And then let's move right to the first substantial point in the order of the day, this afternoon session of our works. It's point number 7. Libre security dialogue with the Commission. Police information exchange, in particular, future developments regarding PROM and the AP Council Directive, recent terrorist attacks and the ways to combat terrorism. First of all, we're having a presentation and exchange of views with our Commissioner, Ylva Johansson, in charge of Home Affairs. And then we will be hearing from the German Presidency, Dr. Christian Klaus, not for the first time, Director General of the Federal Ministry of Interior of the Deutsche Bundesregierung, the Europäische Präsidentschaft, the Präsidentschaft des Europäischen Union. So, let's move to Ylva Johansson. We had a meeting with experts that took place September the 22nd. Policy Department procured study on the topic. Dr. Njovi Babrula from the Queen Mary University of London. We had the opportunity to discuss it, and we will be now hearing first from Commissioner Johansson. Scheduled time for her presentation is maximum 15 minutes, but surely she can do it shorter than that. And then we will hear from Dr. Kloss, and then, of course, the usual exchange of views, starting with the coordinators and then the rest of the members willing to intervene. Commissioner Johansson, you're there. Yes. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Yes, I'm delighted to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. And this is, of course, a very serious topics that we are going to talk about. I start with the recent brutal terrorist attacks in Paris, Conflans, Nice, Vienna. These are attacks on our freedoms. These were attacks on the European Union and all our common project stands for. The freedom of expression and information, the right to education, the freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and most of all, human dignity, the right to life, and the right to liberty and security enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. We need to show strong solidarity as a union. We need to unite as a society. We need to show that our values are unbreakable and that we cannot be divided on this. We are together the European Union, and to me it's clear that we need to step up our common fight against terrorism, online and offline, to anticipate, to prevent, to protect and to respond. The rule of law provides a common framework for our actions. Our fight against terrorism is, of course, not directed against any specific religion or political belief. It's directed against violent extremism in all its forms. It's directed against terrorism. You all know that we have already taken many actions to counter terrorism and extremism in all forms, many actions to strengthen our external border protection and information exchange. We are much better protected today compared to a few years ago. But we also have a lot of decisions that have not been properly implemented yet. We need to step up urgently both the implementation but also to close the remaining security gaps. I will put forward a new agenda on counter-terrorism already the 9th of December. Drawing lessons from the recent and past attacks and suggesting a way forward in the fight against terrorism in the coming years, with some steps being taken already in the coming weeks. Fighting terror starts with prevention. We are working already with the Radicalisation Awareness Network and local actors who are best placed to better detect signs of radicalisation and to develop more effective responses. For example, by improving the follow-up of convicted terrorists in prison and prison leavers. The role of local actors is equally crucial in improving the protection of our public spaces. We need to promote more security by design in our cities. We know that small measures like a sturdy locked door or a button to alert emergency services can make a life-saving difference. A more structured cooperation at local level, including among the cities, will be important. I am exploring to mobilize additional funding both to help cities fight against radicalisation and to help them protect their public spaces, including spaces of worship. Likewise, critical infrastructures continue to be potential targets of terrorist attacks. Still this year, we will propose legislation to strengthen the framework for the protection and resilience of critical infrastructure. The attacker in Vienna used an AK-47 assault rifle. Member states should make the fight against firearms trafficking a priority. Many member states still have not transposed the Firearms Directive. It's essential to combat the illicit use of firearms. The Commission will report next year on its state of implementation, and I can assure you that I will not be shy about enforcing it. We must prevent the terrorists from using the internet to recruit people and spread their message of hate. In one action day in July this year, Europol's Internet Referral Unit helped assess 2,000 web addresses and referred terrorist content to providers. This included manuals and tutorials on how to prepare and carry out terrorist attacks, and instructions on how to stay anonymous and avoid detection when planning an attack. To me, this underscores the urgency of adopting the Commission's proposals for regulation on the prevention to disseminate terrorist content online. So I do hope that we, before Christmas, can conclude the trialogue on the terrorist content online file. The recent attacks have shown again the importance of effective police cooperation within the Union. Much progress has been made in this regard, and I would like to highlight in particular the role of Europol in supporting Member States' counter-terrorist investigations. Border guards and police must be able to cross-check identity documents against all relevant information systems, including future ETIAS, in line with the existing access rights. Achieving interoperability of our systems by the end of 2023 is a priority at all levels. We are not stronger than the weakest link in the chain, so it's important that all member states and all actors really step up on the interoperability implementation. This includes feeding information in the Schengen information system on persons that have been identified at national level as posing a threat of terrorist or violent extremism. It's crucial that all those entering and exiting the EU are checked systematically against this key database. This is required and necessary in order to detect all the individuals who have an alert placed on them, including forest terrorist fighters. But last year, a report from Frontex showed that 22% of all passengers crossing the external border were not checked against the Schengen information system. And I see this is a significant security gap that has to be closed. The use and analysis of passenger name record data is an essential tool to detect known and previously unknown terrorist suspects. It's important that the EU Passenger Name Record Directive is fully implemented. Today we will discuss specifically on the important data exchange tools which have the key role, the PRIM decision and the Advanced Passenger Information API and their revision. We have different tools and different information systems that are being talked about here. Just let me clear a bit how they are related to each other. Schengen Information System is a central database where persons with different kinds of alert are in, like foreign terrorist fighters or known terrorists or other, but there could also be other persons with a lower level of alert. There could also be people that you should be aware of, but not necessarily have to be arrested when they cross a border. So Schengen Information System is a central database where the border guards can have access. PNR is the information on a person that is going to travel into the European Union. Name, flight, seat, credit card used to buy the tickets, for example. And this information is being sent by the flight, the airplane, what's it called? It's the airplane companies, for example, to the receiving member state in advance of the person leaving to come to the European Union. API, Advanced Passenger Information, is much older than PNR. This directive is from 2004, so it's really old now. This is the information that you put with your passport when you are checking in at the airport, and that is being sent to the member state of the destination when you are flying. Sometimes it's the paper you fill in when you're sitting in the plane, and you have to show it when you leave the plane. So API API has less information than PNR today, but it's a complement to PNR, because there you have the people that are really actually on the plane, and that also the information about their identity, about their passport, for example. So the API, as I said, is from 2004, the directive, so it's pretty close, pretty old. The Commission recently carried out an evaluation of API directive, and our findings are in line with the study carried out by the European Parliament on API. Our evaluation confirms that the collection of API data remains vital. This is also illustrated by the repeated United Nations calls to increase the use of API data to fight terrorism and organized crime, and by the commitment to set up API systems shown by the member states of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. Our evaluation also highlights a number of shortcomings that reduce the effectiveness and coherence of the API directive in practice, namely lack of standardization and harmonization, lack of detailed data protection safeguards, and lack of clear alignment with the latest policy and legal developments at EU level. To address these shortcomings, the Commission has launched an impact assessment. Next year, this should result in a legislative proposal to amend the API directive. Initial ideas currently being assessed include: first, to build on the future ETIAS entry-exit system architecture to streamline the data flow, creating synergies and economies of scale. Second, using new technological solutions to increase data quality. For example, replacing manual input by automatic collection of API data. Scanning your passport, for example, instead of filling in the form by hand. Third, expanding the collection of API data to more routes and or other modes of transport. The current directive does not specify for which flight data should be collected, but leaves this to member states. It does specify that the carriers must transmit data for inbound flights entering Schengen from third countries upon request of member states' authorities. An updated directive could cover other flights as well, for example, flights between Schengen countries, and could also cover other carriers by land, by rail, and by water. Fourth, streamlining and clarifying the use of API data for law enforcement purposes. This is in conjunction with the PNR directive, which mandates the transfer of API data as part of the PNR message if collected by carriers. In this phase, we are looking at the possible solutions to address the current shortcomings and make the best possible use of API data. It's important that we approach this exercise with an open mind, discuss and exchange ideas and thoughts on this topic, and I'm looking forward to that. PRIM is not a central database, and it's not sending personal data. PRIM is for criminal law purposes and allow for automated check on a hit, no hit. The PRIM decision is also quite old. It's from 2008, and that allows check for hit, no hit for DNA, fingerprints, and vehicle registration data. Only people or vehicles that are part of criminal investigations could be here and could be checked here. If there is a hit, the national authorities in one member state could reach out to the other member state and receive the information bilaterally. So PRIM is a connection to check whether there is a hit in another member state's system. So, for example, if police in one member state have fingerprints from a criminal investigation, from the crime scene, and they don't know who this fingerprints belongs to, they check to the national database, and if there's no hit, they can use the PRIM to check whether there are a hit for this fingerprints in another member state. And if there is a hit, then they have to go bilaterally to reach out to the other member state to access the data on who this fingerprints belongs to. These checks are essential in criminal investigations and have helped identify many criminals, which would not have been possible based on checks against national databases only. For example, PRIM framework can be used in a case. I already had this, sorry. When you're checking the fingerprints, for example, you can find this. They can be, for example, if you have not a full fingerprint, and then you can have checks that could be that fingerprint, and then you can also reach out bilaterally to find out whether it's a potential check or not. And that's the way that suspect can be identified, and that the criminal investigations can go on and lead to the prosecution and conviction of a criminal. But this is an old one. Since 2008, security, technology, forensic and data protection environments have advanced in leaps and bounds, such as interoperability of information system, privacy by design, technical solutions, or the adoption of the EU new data protection framework in 2016. So now it's highly time to update the rulebook on the PRIM decision. We have, as the Commission has commissioned a feasibility study on possible improvements of the PRIM decision, and that was published in May this year. This study and the Parliament study that you commissioned 2 years ago, and other analyses on PRIM by other stakeholders, the regular discussions on PRIM in the relevant council, working party and other fora made us aware of significant shortcomings of the PRIM system and highlighted possible improvements. First, we must simplify PRIM. We have a web of, in theory, 351 bilateral links between member states that have to establish per data category. So, for example, if one member state would search for fingerprints in another member state, they have to go directly to each other member state to check if there is a hit or no hit. If they would like to search for the DNA, if there is a hit, they have to go to another channel to each member state to do that. As a result, member states have not fully implemented and used PRIM. We could instead have a central router with just 27 links. That would make it much easier for member states to establish and maintain connections. A central router could have also other advantages, like collecting statistics and offering central technical support to member states possibly. That means that one member state could go to one link and then check for hit, no hit in all other member states at the same time. So that's what we are considering, a router to simplify information flow. That should not be mistaken for a central PRIM information system, because it's not. All data is still based in each member state, and another member state cannot have direct access to that. They have to go bilaterally and ask and have a decision on that. But they could have the hit, no hit sign. Second, we need to speed up and streamline information exchange after forensic experts confirm a hit. Comparing DNA and fingerprints in PRIM results in anonymous hits. But the mere knowledge of a hit in a database of another member state is useless in a criminal investigation. It's essential to identify the person behind that hit. Currently, it can take weeks or
Excuse
even
me, Commissioner
months.
Johansson, unexpectedly, you were allocated 15 minutes, and you've been talking almost 19. So if you may help us out,
Sorry.
just because we still have to hear from Dr. Kloss and then the coordinators and speakers.
Yeah. So we would need to step up on PRIM decisions so that they can have maybe additional data, more streamlining of the exchange of data. And we are now preparing for the impact assessment for the PRIM impact assessment. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johansson, for you wrapped up in the final end of your presentation, so that we may still hear from Dr. Kloss and then opening the floor. Dr. Kloss, are you there? You've been allocated 5 minutes.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, please.
I hope that you can see me soon. Takes always some
Not yet.
seconds if we
Not yet.
get live with our camera. I hope that we overcome these difficulties, but if you allow, I might
Not
start
yet.
for 5 minutes, Chair. I
Nicht noch.
understand.
Nicht noch. Nicht noch.
Noch nicht? Mann, ey, das
Now,
jetzt.
jetzt. Now we see you. Jetzt.
Okay, very
Jetzt.
good. And you can also hear me.
Es ist okay jetzt. Wir sind vorbereiten. Sie haben das Wort. 5 Minuten.
Okay, thank you
5
very much
Minuten,
indeed.
bitte.
Bitte?
5 Minuten.
Okay, 5 minutes. It would be my pleasure, and as I was here in this committee, and I'm thankful to have again the chance since last week to make a presentation.
Excuse me, Dr. Kloss,
And,
we have lost sight of you.
The
no.
Council, statement, joint statement of the Ministers of Interior, and the Council took place last Friday, and please allow me also to make particular reference to this joint statement, as we regard it as a very strong signal of solidarity and also determination to fight against terrorism. And the most important thing, I believe, is also the order on how the joint statement is designed. It's not only referring to classical issues of public security, but it makes clear that this takes place against a background which is much broader, and that we need a holistic approach. First of all, we reaffirm, or the ministers reaffirmed, that we have a clear European framework on counter-terrorism, and we do not start from scratch at all, but that this is a constant adjustment to the threat of international terrorism. And we were also some kind of affected by the terrorist attacks in our work during the German presidency, and we were currently in work on the comprehensive Council conclusions on internal security and the European police partnership, and many of the action points you will find then in this key instrument of the German presidency in the December Council meeting. But when I speak of the right order, is that in this joint statement, the first thing which is upheld is the principle of religious freedom, which need to be highlighted, and also to make clear that the fight against terrorism is not directed against any religious beliefs or political beliefs, but against fanatical and violent extremism. And this is the starting point of all the efforts, that we need this holistic approach which is broader, which should also touch on social cohesion measures. And one part of it is that we need to increase the sense of belonging and equality in our societies, and that this refers also to integration. And the ministers stated that this is a two-way street, that on the one hand the migrant, him or herself, have to make their contribution towards successful integration, but also that societies have to promote this important integration into. Then we turn into, or the ministers turned into the security issues. Of course, the Schengen area, the importance of securing the external borders is once again highlighted, but here under particular focus that we need to prevent the entrance of persons posing a terrorist or violent extremist threat. And these people remain a major challenge for the security authorities. And therefore it is clearly needed that we at least take note of the mobility of this group of persons, and we see here a clear need to improve the information exchange. And this relates to the general initiative on the European Police Partnership that every police officer should have access to the information which is actually needed to do their jobs, and that we have to make also better use of the existing knowledge we have already, which means that we need really the exchange of what is already exists, but also the ministers underline the importance of data retention, data collection, sharing and data analysis, always of course with respect for the fundamental rights. There was also reference made to the joint declaration of the 21st of October on the future of Europol, as Europol plays also a key role, in particular with its European counter-terrorism center. Another issue is the prevention of radicalisation online and offline, and here reference was made also to the negotiations of the regulations on terrorist content online, and I know in this committee tomorrow there will be the continuation of the trilogue procedure, and the Council, and this was a very clear signal from many ministers and their interventions. The expectation would be that we hopefully come together to a conclusion of this file, and that we really can bring into effect this important piece of legislation. One other issue is that was already outlined here last Monday. This is the question of data encryption and the possibilities for law enforcement authorities under particular screening procedure have access to such information. And also relevant in this context is the need that we have an exchange on these persons of posing a terrorist or violence extremist threat, and the Commissioner had already mentioned the foreign terrorist fighters in this context, but also the others which are posing a threat. And last week there was some media attention whether there would be a need for a common definition of these persons. Actually, for the daily work this is not necessarily needed. The only thing is needed what a member state does understand under a threat or a person which poses a threat, and then this is a workable environment for the member states. And in order to keep the 5 minutes, Chair, I would like just to make reference, because this is today the key issue, the EU information architecture, and the Commissioner also referred in particular to the API initiative, which we really support, but also the revision of the PRIM exchange, but the Commissioner has perfectly described it well, the need to do this. And by this, I would like to apologize for the disorder of my camera, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
We thank you, Dr. Klaas. Sure you noticed we were in trouble because the camera kept losing track of you and we kept losing sight of you, so the interpreters kept going. Anyhow, we thank them for the work, despite the difficulties, the technical difficulties, which are becoming a regular of our working procedures. But anyhow, let's go right to the open dialogue, which is supposed to mean this point in our order of the day. We will open a first round of speakers, namely the coordinators. It will be for the EPP, Lukas Mandl. If you are there, yes. The floor is yours.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to the Commissioner, and I'd also like to thank the representative of the German presidency for the introduction and for both of the reports. As an Austrian, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their expressions of sympathy, and also for all of the support that has reached us from all over Europe following this brutal atrocity in our capital, Vienna. It's not the first terrorist attack in Europe. We need to all work to ensure that if it's not the last, we at least can say that we have done everything we possibly can to ensure that terrorists find no ground for their activities in Europe, and that if so, and it's not just a question of terrorist acts carried out by political Islam. It's also a question of the ideology. We need to address the supporters of that ideology, and so for that reason I would agree with what was said on the Schengen information system. We need information. We need to know who the followers of this doctrine are, and we need to know about people who've been to Syria. We need to know about all of the threats from other areas which can emanate out towards Europe. And so for that reason, I would ask the Commission to make sure that we list all of the names in the Schengen information system in such a way that we can deal with it with as little bureaucracy as possible and get as much information as we can into the system. We need to deal with security at the external borders, and this has to be part of the asylum package, and we have to tackle hate speech both online and offline, and that is something which has to be done by member states. It's not it has to be done by authorities, not by private organisation. But we have to make sure that the type of hate speech that's not allowed offline isn't allowed online either. And we need to make sure that we have sanctions for violations of this type. And I think online content can be particularly dangerous, and we need to work on these issues. We need to work well. And those who want to weaken us from outside Europe, what they want to do is divide us. They want to play one side off against the other, and that's something we simply cannot allow. And we need to fight political Islam as an ideology. And so I would ask the presidency to focus on this, and it's something that we need to do as parliamentarians as well.
Minutes for the coordinators, so that we can handle, because slots are very much restricted these days. So we must bear in mind the time condition all the way. Please always have it in mind, because otherwise we go out of hand. The floor goes now to Caterina Chinichi. So please try to phrase your mind on the matter for 2 minutes, around 2 minutes. Please, Caterina. Onorevole Chinichi, lei ha la parola.
Sì, grazie, Presidente. Grazie.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Commissioner Johansson. I note that we don't have an image. I'd like to thank Mrs. Johansson for having stressed the new agenda for taking on terrorism, that we do need cooperation between police forces and exchanges of data between forces. Commissioner, you preempted me somewhat. You're talking about a revision of the API directive. As we're all aware, it's very important that there has to be coordination with the PNR system. I think that this timely review is an important one, but could you give us an idea of the time frame? When is this going to be reviewed? Then we also have the PRUM system. The system is now out of date. It's time for it to be modernized. And we certainly need some technical improvements as well. But my question is, The Prüm decision and other police cooperation instruments are not really up to the requirements of the Anti-Terrorism Directive of 2017. Now that we have a definition of terrorism in the directive, and member states haven't necessarily implemented that correctly and applied it. So, do you have any views on that? Then, we have to remember the important role of Europol in exchange of data. Commissioner, could you give us further information on the objective of making police cooperation not an ad hoc matter, but rather a structural, systematic approach? I'd like to thank Commissioner Johansson and Dr. Kloss for your efforts on this subject. Thank you very much.
Grazie a lei, onorevole Knichi. Now for Renew, it's Fabien Keller. Vous avez la parole. 2 minutes.
You have the floor for 2 minutes. Fabienne Keller, are you there? I'm sure you're there. We can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. Have you turned on the microphone? We don't seem to have any sound. Does that work better? Yes, now we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, Mrs. Keller, we can hear you. I was cut off. Oh dear. Yes, we can hear you. We could actually hear you when you were speaking, Mrs. Keller. Mrs. Keller, we can hear you when you speak.
Vous êtes là? Vous êtes...
We can see you. We can hear you. Fabienne, go ahead.
Fabienne, ça ne vous dérange pas?
Fabienne, I think we're going to go on to Patrick Breyer from the Greens, and then we'll come back to you. I hope that's okay. So please be ready. Be ready to take the floor.
Breyer from the Greens. Are you there, Patrick? Ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Please do.
Thank you, Chair. Now, regarding the tragedy of the recent terrorist attacks, let me stress that we are all shocked by what has happened. However, we may never give up our values. We need to stand up for fundamental rights and freedom of speech, which, by the way, Samuel Paty, for example, had to die for. Terrorist attacks are attacking us precisely for our fundamental freedoms, so we must never let them succeed by curtailing ourselves these freedoms in reaction to terrorist attacks. Now, police have unfortunately repeatedly failed to watch perpetrators long known to them before they committed terrorist acts, for example, in the case of Austria. And I've recently spoken to a victim's attorney. Would you agree, Commissioner, that there is no deficit in surveillance powers, but a deficit in enforcement regarding terrorism? And also, would you agree that online platforms should report manifest terrorist content to law enforcement for prosecution? Why is this reporting element missing from your proposal that would make sure that terrorist content is actually prosecuted? I'm very concerned to hear your plans regarding the possible expansion of bulk collection of information on non-suspected travelers in the EU, regarding passenger information concerning train and ferry travel. Would you agree that we have a right to travel anonymously within the EU. That is part of the freedom to move within the EU. And are you aware that Council has not adopted its resolution on widening the scope of PNR precisely because this has been a very controversial issue, and the European Court of Justice is only just considering the PNR directive. So in this opinion on the Canadian PNR agreement, the European Court of Justice said it is disproportionate to retain our passenger data for years. May I ask you, Commissioner, when will you put forward your proposal to revise the PNR directive to make it compliant with our fundamental rights? And likewise, on data retention, we've had fundamental judgments recently. Will you start infringement proceedings to those member states that do not comply with these judgments? And if I may make a last remark, Chair, on the encryption. We've had this debate before. It's essential to internet safety, and we need to decide between safe communications and interceptability. So I would like to hear your opinion, Commissioner. Will you compromise safe encryption to make it interceptable, or do you think safety online is more important? Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, Fabien Keller, vous êtes là? Vous êtes prête maintenant?
Are you there now? Are you ready? We're back. We're back to... Let me give you the floor if you're there. Yes, thank you very much. Chair, I do apologize for the technical difficulties. Commissioner, Director General, thank you very much for your total commitment in the fight against terrorism and to protect our citizens. And thank you very much to Mr. Kloss as well for the work that you've been doing on the withdrawal of online terrorist content. Commissioner, you talked about the steps which are being taken to improve the application of the directive and also the Prüm agreement. Could you tell us a little bit more about how we can ensure the best possible interoperability between the systems of member states? And, for example, are you thinking about the possibility of linking the Prüm system, which is a very effective database, EU-LISA? Are you thinking about linking those? And then the second thing I wanted to ask you about is Brexit. Do you think that the UK will be able to continue to participate in Prüm and to exchange data with EU member states? I think you'll be aware that there was a problem in the saving in the UK of some of the data from our systems. But the UK is a large country that gives us a lot of useful information. So what do you think will happen in that possible cooperation with our major neighbour, the UK, in our fight against terrorism?
It'll be Patrick Jackie. You there, Patrick? Connected? Please press button. Yes, there you are.
Thank you very much, Chair. Madam Commissioner, I will speak in Polish.
There are three things which are most important. First, migration. Second, where terrorists have the most important areas of recruitment. And thirdly, exchange of information. So number one, migration. It's very important that we come up with a system that is universal, that will protect us from arrivals of people coming to the EU only for terrorist activity exclusively. We must finally prepare effective tools in that area. Second, what are the areas of recruitment of operation? That's the internet in the first place, undoubtedly. So my question to the Commissioner is how to convince some parties so that they support the solutions on fighting terrorism on the internet, by which I mean the terrorist content online regulation. And now the third item, exchange of information and data. And here I would like to thank you, Commissioner, for your ideas on continuing work on information exchange when it comes to prints and delicate information. That information can be of key importance on many occasions where we will be able to prevent terrorism. So migration, fighting terrorists where they are and where they operate, that is on the internet. And thirdly, a new platform for fast exchange of information among member states, such as prints, among other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacki. Now it'll be Cornelia Ernst for the GUE. You there?
Okay, vielen herzlichen Dank.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentations. I'd actually like to deal with this differently. I think we need to talk about exactly what we mean or who we mean. The greatest danger, according to Mr. Seehofer, is the extreme right. And so I think we need to talk about that. Of course, we're talking about Islamic terrorism. I think that's clear. But there are other forms of terrorism. And I think we need to say exactly what we're dealing with. And so that's why I think we need to be very clear what we're talking about. And I'm wondering whether what we're talking about here, data, whether that's really going to solve the problem. Is that really going to make it possible to identify terrorist acts and prevent them? I think that really is a question. Prüm data, we're talking about directives that we need, guidelines. And I think I'd like to say that we really have the impression that there's this compulsion to collect data, and I wonder where that's going to stop. PNR 2017, that was clear. What happened? I'd like to ask the Commission about that because it's not clear to me what happened. Is that simply not playing any kind of role anymore? So whether we're in the train, in the bus, everywhere, there are all sorts of equipment used to collect data. But do you really think that that's making life safer? Because I'm not sure that what the Commission is proposing is going to help us to fight against terrorism. And terrorism is a very real threat. And I think maybe we're having too much focus just on data. Thank you.
And for the non-iscritti, Laura Ferrara. Onorevole Ferrara, lei è pronta? Lei è pronta?
Sì. Grazie, Presidente.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, recent terrorist attacks have reminded us how terrorism is an insidious phenomenon that strikes perhaps when attention is elsewhere, which is why you should never let down your guard. You have to continue to work on prevention, legal and social. Clearly, there's a need to improve interoperability of databases and implement that immediately, and also undertake interinstitutional negotiations on e-evidence. And also, we have to ensure that all member states implement the anti-money laundering directives so that we can tackle the financing provided for criminal organisations, which includes terrorist organisations. Now, I do have a question for Commissioner Johansson, and that relates to a different aspect, i.e. Schengen. During recent days, there's been talk of reforming the Schengen area because inevitably, perhaps, and unfortunately, when these terrorist attacks occur, links between terrorists and migration emerge. So I'm wondering whether this proposal to reform Schengen, which was proposed by the French government, is something that the European Commission supports, And therefore, are we moving towards reviewing one of the pillars of the European Union, which I don't think should be called into question, because I think if we're going to act, we should act on all the aspects that the Commissioner listed. Thank you.
Okay, now, if you may, let's proceed to the second round of speakers. That'll do. And then we will, of course, be back to both our speakers, Commissioner Johansson and Dr. Klaus for the German presidency. But let's complete the list, please, because we still have some minutes to go. For the EPP, it'll be Isabel Viceler-Lima. Isabel, vous êtes là? Vous êtes là.
Je suis là. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I'm here. Thank you, Chairman. Well, like other members, I believe that the most important thing is to defend our values. We need to maintain a balance between our duty to protect the lives of private individuals and the duty of protecting our citizens against criminal and terrorist acts. We shouldn't be naive about this. Criminals certainly aren't. Commissioner, with regard to relations with the United Kingdom, what kind of cooperation will we be looking for in the future? I think it would be a real shame to lose the UK as an important source of information. I think that's something that's particularly important. And my other question relates to Prüm. Now we're looking at perfecting that. Does the Commission have a timetable for doing that? And then to conclude, I'd like to say that I'm very attached to the Schengen area. I firmly believe that we will only be able to keep it alive if we manage to protect our borders and ensure that information is properly exchanged within the Schengen area. Thank you.
Isabel Santos. La palabra. Isabel Santos. Ahí.
Thank you, Mr. President. While we strongly condemning all forms of terrorism, I believe it is important to carefully look and understand the root causes of terrorism. Security proposal which the EU Interior Ministers pledged for last Friday are indubitably important and needed as part of a strategy to counter terrorism. However, this cannot be the only way forward. A common EU response is needed, and this is why we must be extremely cautious, is needed, and cannot go against our most fundamental values, rights and freedoms. This is why we must be extremely cautious when we are discussing Schengen. This shows that we must also consider different approaches with much bigger potential and on the long run. In this regard, I would like to ask you, Mrs. Commissioner, what is the state of play of the new action plan on integration and inclusion, and what will be the role of municipalities, NGOs and civil society in this plan?
Thank you. Now, it'll go to Renew, Maite Pagasartundua.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, let me begin by emphasizing that we need to continue to improve our effectiveness. Terrorism is changing and we need to adapt as well. Now, one thing that we can emphasize in this committee is that the connectivity of databases isn't optimal in all member states, and that's something that needs to change. Now, I'm particularly concerned about new trends in violent radicalisation, because it's much easier to generate communities of hate over the internet, and some members of these communities can then become cells or individuals who then move towards murder and terrorism. the radicalisation of neo-Nazis, jihadis, far-right extremists, far-left extremists. There are far too many elements that mean that we have to prevent violent radicalisation. There's a Europol report which says that there is now a new move towards perhaps violence in an area that hasn't done away with previous radical views. And I'm talking about the Basque country here. Now, we need the exchange of information between member states. But apart from that, is there anything else new that we should know about? Thank you.
I'm also in the list, ACR, Charlie Weimers. Are you connected, Charlie? Ready to go? Can you press the button?
Tack så mycket, herr ordförande. Kommissionär Ylva Johansson.
Commissioner, the UN expert committee says that potential terrorists can use migration routes. Even the left-wing newspaper The Guardian sees the link between these phenomena. The people who, the man who cut the throat of a priest in France had just come in as a migrant. Ylva Johansson thinks that the UN is wrong, that the Guardian is wrong, that Macron lacks insight. But it's quite clear that there is some kind of link between migration and terrorism. Can you save your face on this in continuing to say that there is absolutely no link between immigration and terrorism?
Thank you. And now I think we may complete the second round with another 3 speakers that I have listed. Bala Sitvegi for the EPP, are you there? Bala Sitvegi, are you there, connected? Is he connected? Nope. Then how about Moritz Körner, Renew? Yes, Hitvegi, you're there. Please do.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you very much for the floor, Commissioner. Thanks for your comments. Now, I would like to raise 2 issues. We have had 2, actually more than 2 terrible attacks, and one of those perpetrators just arrived in Europe recently. He was brought into Europe on an NGO ship through the Mediterranean, and then he got lost from the authorities. The other one grew up in Europe, in Austria, and he still turned against his country and the people that he lived with. Both cases illustrate the difficulties with integration and also with migration. So my question to you is, how is the Commission's work proposal and action plans will ensure that illegal migrants are not lost by the authorities after they have arrived in Europe? How are you going to ensure that NGOs do not contribute to transporting potential Islamist terrorists into European territory, which is happening now? And secondly, how can we ensure that Islamist influence in terms of thinking, in terms of propaganda online, but both also in mosques through imams and through propaganda, how can we ensure that that is stopped in time to save lives and not let this kind of terrorist activity take root in Europe and strengthen the difficulties and the dangers to European people? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And final floor, it will be for Jorge Bushari. No, excuse me, Moritz Körner, the Renew. Moritz Körner.
Mr. Körner,
hören Sie nicht.
We are going to refresh.
Wir hören Sie nicht, Herr Körner.
No, we are going to refresh your page and in
Auf
5
mit den
seconds
Kopfhörern, vielleicht.
I did it.
Hören Sie mich jetzt?
Ja, jetzt, wir hören Sie.
Yes, we can hear you now. Commissioner, thank you very much for your presentation. we see the same pattern after every terrorist attack, it seems. Prior to carrying out our analysis and looking for errors, we come up with proposals which limit potentially the freedoms of our citizens. There's another microphone on in the room, which is making it very difficult to interpret. So, encryption. Is there going to be a legislative proposal on that? And if so, when? And is the Commission planning an extension of the data storage rules? Thank you.
Por último, Jorge Bouchardet, ¿está presente?
Mr. Bouchardet, are you here? Jorge Bouchardet, are you connected? Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, we're talking about a strategy to fight terrorism, but as some colleagues have already said, I think we need to go further. We have to get to the root of the issue because we have to come up with a strategy to deal with illegal migration. Obviously, the 3 Catholics killed in a cathedral in Nice were murdered by a migrant who had come to Lampedusa, apparently brought there by an NGO. And the refugee who killed the teacher in Paris was a false refugee, had been rejected in Poland. Now, we can blame the teacher, for example, who was freely teaching, or you can blame me if you want to, if that will appease your conscience. But I think what we need is a strategy to close Salafi and Wahhabi mosques, which preach Islam as a political and Sharia-based religion. In the new asylum and migration plan, I think there's a lack of clear measures. We need platforms for disembarkations in third countries, and we need to look at all international cooperation agreements where funds are provided and cut funds for those states who don't cooperate with the European Union when it comes to the return of illegal migrants. We're not trying to keep the Trojan horse out of Europe. It's already here. The point is not to open the door of the horse. We need to defend our values, our lives, and the lives of our co-citizens. Thank you.
It's been quite a round, and surely lively and passionate at times. We are concerned not only about the latest developments, the latest attacks both in France and Austria, but to the whole issue, the whole array of concerns that have been, again, put on the table, including victims' rights, protecting citizens, a comprehensive EU strategy which deals with all of the component elements of the puzzle. So we have some material for thought, and I suggest final floor for concluding remarks to both of our panelist guest speakers, getting started with Commissioner Johansson. Floor goes back to you, having in mind that we have scheduled, let's say, 10 more minutes. Can you make it in 6 minutes so that there will also be some 3 or 4 minutes for Mr. Klaus? Thank you.
Thank you. I would try, Juan Fernando. It was a lot of questions here, so I try to respond to them quickly. Safety online is my highest priority, and I must say that sometimes I think that we might be naive. We need to be better protect ourselves online. Of course, we should protect the freedom of speech, but we must also protect, like a teacher, Samuel Paty, that was actually acting for the freedom of speech, and he was killed by a terrorist that found him online. So we need to be better on both anticipate, prevent, protect, and respond. And the terrorists, as many of you already said, they are trying to destroy our society, and they are attacking our values, and they use the freedom online to do that. So that's why we really need to do more on this. So the Schengen information system, it's already mandatory to put in terrorism-related alerts there. But as was shown by Frontex, not all people that enter the Schengen are being checked towards the Schengen information system, and that worries me a lot. Of course, some terrorists come here, crossing our borders with the ambition to commit terrorist crimes here, and that's why we need to protect our borders. That's why we need to check everybody of security. That's why I have proposed that we should have a mandatory screening process for everybody that comes irregularly to the European Union, and they should also be put into the Eurodac system. And if they pose a security threat, they should not be let into the member states. But migration is a normal thing. We have 22 million people in the European Union with migrant backgrounds, and of course we don't have 22 million people that are posing a threat. On the contrary, we saw this Palestinian young boy that actually was the one who saved more or less this police in Nice. Some have asked about the timetable, and the API directive and the PRIM decision is going to be presented Q2 next year. The terrorism definition is clear in the terrorist directive. We need police cooperation by default, not by case by case. And may I say that what I'm proposing now, going to propose, we are assessing this of course, the API and the PRIM, it's not about collecting new data. It's about having more modern and better up-to-date way of exchanging the data. So for example, for PRIM, it's to have, what we're considering is to have a central router, so that there will be one connection from member states so they can check the hits in other member states. These are criminal investigation alerts that are being put into different member states. So this is to have this to work better. API is about better quality of the data that we are already sending to the receiving member state, and that needs to have a better quality, and it has to also be up to date when it comes to the new or the more modern protection of sending data that we have that is in place right now. And I must say that I am not, the PNR is already there, and this is not what I'm preparing now, any changes in that. Many of you have asked about encryption, and that's a very, of course, difficult issue. It's important tool to enhance cybersecurity for the protection of fundamental rights, such as privacy. At the same time, encryption can also be used by predators seeking a secure channel to hide their actions from law enforcement and judiciary. So that could make it very, very difficult to investigate, detect, and prosecute criminal offenses. So that's why we said in the Security Union strategy that we presented this summer that we will explore and support a balanced technical, operational, and legal solutions, and promote an approach which both maintains the effectiveness of encryption in protecting privacy and securing security of communication, but also effective tools for law enforcement. And I think that's why our role as politicians is to find the right balance here. Terrorists are really a threat, and we need to protect ourselves much better, and also to they are recruiting each other on the net, and many of you have also said that this is like where they can have they have these hate communities where they inspire each other, teach each other on how to carry out terrorist attacks. And I think that's why it's so important that we can take down the terrorist content online immediately. And that is when there is a national authority that is a competent authority to have this withdrawal decision towards a service provider in another member state. The cross-border, the EU-wide effect is, of course, that this authority already in the member state have already the possibility to take this content to prosecution and its investigation, but at the same time it has to be taken down immediately so that not others are being inspired. On Schengen, We are preparing now for the first Schengen forum that will take place in a few weeks. So we have the first discussion on the future of Schengen and what kind of development is necessary for the Schengen, and that I will present in the Schengen strategy in May next year. So we are not collecting, what I'm proposing is not collecting a lot of new information, it's using information in a better quality of the information and better connections and better interoperability. And the action plan on integration and inclusion will be presented this month, and there's an important role for NGOs and local level in there, because that's where integration and inclusion takes place, and that's where you feel welcome and make friends. So that's extremely important, and that you're going to see in my action plan on integration and inclusion. Yeah. And better protection of borders, it's really necessary. And as I would also say about prevention, it's important. And I think that sometimes when you are successful in prevention, or if you are successful in de-radicalize people, there would never be headlines in the news, but that could actually save lives. So I think it's very important to continue with prevention and the radicalization awareness network, even if it not poses any new headlines. The counter-terrorism directive has not been transposed correctly in all member states, but there we have the definition of terrorism is there, but we need to see whether we need to do more for the implementation everywhere. On the PNR, EU-Canada PNR agreement has been renegotiated with Canada, but Canada has stopped. They don't want to agree on the text that we have negotiated so far, so this has been put on hold right now. On Brexit, I think it's really important that we can have a good agreement with the UK, especially when it comes to the security files. But I think right now it's not the time to say what will happen if we do not reach that agreement, because we are right now in the very, very intense negotiations with the UK. So let's hope that that will end up in a good negotiations that can keep us both partners secure. Yes, thank you.
So much, Commissioner Johansson. You made your best to summarize that final remark after having heard so many questions, just understandably so. But let's hear for the final, let's say, 3 minutes. We have exceeded the time of the schedule point in the order of the day from Dr. Christian Kloss. Please, back to you. Let's see if now we manage to hear you right and see you right. And there you are.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. And I hope I can be seen and heard properly now. Well, there are 4 things I wanted to raise over these next 3 minutes. Now, we tried to keep the declaration of interior ministers rather broad. We tried to go beyond Islamic terrorism, but the terms of terrorism and extremism are rather broadly framed. We want to include right-wing terrorism as well. In Germany, for example, we've got 70 different dangers identified. We've got about 700 Islamist risks as well. So we don't want to try and create a hierarchy of different forms of extremism. Rather, we want to combat all forms of extremist terrorism. As for Islamists, I don't want to use the term political Islam. I don't want to consider that the political arm of Islamism. We need to draw the right dividing lines. There is also the possibility to express one's religious beliefs. If investigating bodies, well, I understood that this was a criticism, but if there need to be new competences for investigating bodies, well, I can explain the current approach with 3 factors. So, travel, communication, and pre-existing crimes. These are the routes that we follow. So we look at travel, we look at travel databases, API, PNR, the new entry-exit system, VIS. That's how we try to keep track of movement. Then we've got communications. Well, a lot goes back to the days of analog telephones. People are communicating differently now. We have to consider encryption and disencryption. Now, the Council hasn't got a final position on this yet, but we have decided that this is a topic that we have to continue to pursue. And then previous crimes in criminal records. The Commission explained very well why we need Prüm, so that we can get a hit for fingerprints or car registration plates, things like that. These are key elements in allowing investigative bodies to draw the right connections, to understand how networks are built and how to combat them. Now, when it comes to suspicion of serious crime or terrorism, then I think that we do actually have the competences that and the mandate that we need to follow these crimes.